We're looking at Chick Corea's classic solo on the tune Spain from the 1972 album Light as a Feather. And I found a few techniques which I found Chick using a lot in the solo, which I think might be very helpful in helping you to develop your lines. So first we're going to start out by listening to the solo. I'm going to play it for you on the guitar. And what I've done here is I've provided both the transcription as well as the guitar fingering that I worked out for myself. Now you may find your own fingerings that you prefer, but these are the fingerings that I ultimately ended up with. And I found this solo very challenging to play actually, trying to take a lot of those keyboard lines and apply them to the guitar, and trying to find ways to pull off some of the string skipping and things like that that don't fall so comfortably on the guitar as they might on the piano. As always, we want to start out by taking a look at the form of the solo in the chord chart of the tune. The solos on this tune occur over a 12-bar form, and even though we see the solo section starting with a G major 7th chord, we're really here in the key of B minor or D major. And this 12-bar solo section repeats over and over again. So what we have is 2 bars of G major 7, 2 bars of F sharp 7, and then 1 bar of E minor 7 to 1 bar of A7, 1 bar of D major 7, 1 bar of G major 7. And then for the last 4 bars, we have here a C sharp 7 chord for 1 bar, F sharp 7 for 1 bar, B minor 7 for 1 bar, and then we finish with a B7 chord, and then we repeat the whole thing over and over again. Oh yeah, before I forget, if you'd like to see more videos like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell icon as well so you can be notified when more videos are released. In working up the solo for the guitar, I took note of some of the scale choices that Chick seems to be using for the various chords in the tune. Now this isn't to say that these are the only scale choices you can use for this tune, of course, but these are the ones that I find Chick using in this particular solo. Starting off with the G major 7th chord, the first chord of the tune, you can hear Chick using both the G Lydian scale as well as playing off of the B minor pentatonic scale. And he uses these scales not only for that first G major 7th chord, but also for the 1 and the 8th bar of the tune. And that G Lydian sound works really well here because, like I said before, we're really in the key of B minor or D major, which includes that C sharp, which would be the sharp 4 of G major. Now for the dominant 7th chords in this tune, the F sharp 7, the A7, the C sharp 7, and the B7 at the end, we can look at these all together because for all these chords, Chick is using a lot of the half-whole diminished sound as well as the alter dominant sound. For example, over the F sharp 7 chord, Chick uses the F sharp half whole diminished scale a lot, and sometimes uses the F sharp altered dominant scale as well. And we'll be taking a look at these a little bit more in depth. For that E minor 7, A7 to D major 7 sequence, which is a 2-5-1, you can play off of this as you would with most 2-5-1s in a jazz setting. So over the E minor 7th, you could use E Dorian. Over that A7, you could use that A altered dominant or A half whole diminished scale. And over the D major 7th chord, D Ionian would be a good scale choice. Or you can even start getting into B minor pentatonic there. Let's look at these dominant 7th chords in the tune and explore the way that Chick uses the half whole diminished scale for these chords. We'll put our attention towards that F sharp 7 chord in particular. First of all, let's make sure that we understand what a half whole diminished scale is. Half whole diminished scale is a symmetrical scale built on a series of half steps followed by whole steps. So it's symmetrical in the sense that it follows this regular pattern. Starting on the note F sharp, we would have F sharp to G, which is a half step, and then G to A, which is a whole step, and then A to A sharp, which is a half step, A sharp to C, which is a whole step, and so on until we get back to the F sharp an octave higher. One of the cool things that we can do with this scale is we can look into the scale and we can pull out the various triads and 7th chords which make up the scale. Let's look at the possible triads which we can find in the scale first. We can put them into 3 categories. We have major triads, we have minor triads, and then we have diminished triads. If we take a look at the major triads, we can see that in the scale we have an F sharp major triad, we have an A major triad, we have a C major triad, and we also have an E flat major triad, or D sharp major triad, if you want to look at it enharmonically. Now as well, using those same root notes, we can get an F sharp minor triad, an A minor triad, a C minor triad, and an E flat minor triad. And then for the diminished type, what's interesting is that every single scale tone here can give us a diminished triad. So in other words, F sharp diminished, G diminished, A sharp, or B flat diminished, and so on. And the reason that I'm pointing this out is that, as we'll see, Chick uses these triads and he uses the 7th chords, which we're going to take a look at in a second, to construct lines. We're going to see some examples in a minute that are found directly in the solo. But let's take a look at the possible 7th chords first. We have dominant 7ths, minor 7ths, and diminished 7ths. And again, for the dominant 7th and minor 7th, we have the exact same root notes as we did with the triads. We have F sharp, A, C, and E flat for both the dominant 7th and the minor 7th type. So just to be clear, all the notes from these chords are found in the scale. And just as with the diminished 7th triads, for the full diminished 7th chords, these can be found on every single note of the scale. F sharp fully diminished 7th, G fully diminished 7th, A fully diminished 7th, and so on up the scale. And why is it exactly that this half whole diminished scale works so well here over these dominant 7th chords? Well, let's take a look at the notes here. In the scale, we find the root, the major 3rd, the 5th, and the flat 7th, which outlines the dominant 7th chord. But as well, we have the cool altered tones. We have the flat 9, and we have the sharp 9, we have the sharp 11, and we have the 13. So using this scale gives a lot of color to the chord, but also supplies that strong dominant 7th foundation of the chord. So now let's dig into Chick's solo a little bit and find some of the spots where he's using some of these chord formations over the dominant 7th chords. There's a good example of this right off the bat on the first F sharp 7 chord in the solo. I want you to take a look here starting on this 3rd beat on the note G. What you can see here over beats 3 and 4 is the outline of an E flat 7 chord. And if we refer to that chart I showed you before of the possible chords we can pull from the half whole diminished scale, we can see that E flat 7 is one of those chords that can be used over an F sharp 7 chord. We have here the notes G, B flat, C sharp, or enharmonically D flat and E flat. the notes from an E flat 7 chord. And then take a look here on the first and second beats of the falling bar, and what you can see is the outline of a C minor 7th chord. The notes G, B flat, C, and E flat, or the 5th, flat 7th, root, and minor 3rd of a C minor 7th chord. And again, C minor 7th is one of those chords that we can pull from an F sharp half-whole diminished scale. So this is a really nice way of building lines by putting together the arpeggios of the different chords that can be pulled from the scale. In this case, E flat 7 to C minor 7. So I'm going to show you one more example, which I think is really cool, and this one occurs in the second chorus of the solo, again on that F sharp 7 chord. And to me, this one really shows off Chick's mastery of the half-whole diminished scale. What he does is he starts off here with an E flat minor 7th arpeggio. Here you can see the notes F sharp, E flat, C sharp, and then looking on the 4th beat, you can see the B flat. So if we take the F sharp and C sharp enharmonically, and look at them as G flat and D flat, we can see this arpeggio as containing the notes E flat, G flat, B flat, and D flat, which is an E flat minor 7th arpeggio. And then here he connects that with a C minor 7th arpeggio towards the end of that bar. And here you can see the notes B flat, C, E flat, and then the note G on the and of 2. And these notes outline a C minor 7th arpeggio. So far we had E flat minor 7th going into C minor 7th. And then he weaves this into an A minor 7th arpeggio, here with the notes A, C natural, G, and E. And then, moving into the next bar, we have an A major triad, A, C sharp, and E. And of course, these 7th chords and the triad here are chords pulled out from that half-whole diminished scale. So for me, looking at a line like this, I might take the line and actually try to use that line in my solo and practice it in all the different keys. But I would also just take the overall concept here, the concept of pulling out triads and pulling out 7th chords from the scale to see how you can weave them in and out of each other to create long flowing lines. Staying with this concept of creating long flowing connected lines, there's another device that I find Chick using a lot in this solo. And that's this idea of taking a small fragment of notes, like a small arpeggio, let's say, and repeating it, but repeating it an octave higher to create a longer line. There are many examples of this in the solo here. Let's check out some of these. Since we've been talking about the half-whole diminished scale, we'll first look at a couple places where he uses a half-whole diminished fragment, but he repeats it an octave higher to create a longer line. So here over this A 7th chord, you can see him using the notes from an A half-whole diminished scale, but he repeats the same 4 notes up an octave to create a line which occurs over the course of the bar, with the notes A, B flat, C sharp, and E flat. The first time starting on beat 1, the second time starting on beat 3. Here's another example of using a fragment from the half-whole diminished scale, in this case over an F sharp 7th chord, and using an F sharp half-whole diminished scale. He takes the notes A, B flat, and F sharp, and immediately connects it with A, B flat, and F sharp but an octave higher. What I find, though, that he really does a lot is he'll take a triad and connect that with a triad an octave higher. Here's an example of this over the G major 7th chord. Here you can see he's using a D major triad over the G major 7th, but he's starting it on the 5th of the chord, so he's starting it with the note A, D, F sharp, immediately followed by A, D, F sharp, an octave higher. One thing that's really interesting is that he often uses these major triads starting on the 5th of the chord. And if you look at the intervallic sequence, you can see that it's a perfect fourth, A to D, followed by a major third. And then when it goes up the octave, you again have that perfect fourth, A to D, followed by the major third. And I point this out because let's say that we had instead started that D major chord on the root. So let's say we had D, F sharp, A, followed by D, F sharp, A up an octave. Well, in this case, we would get a major third, followed by a minor third. And then in the higher octave, we would again have a major third followed by a minor third. But by starting it on the 5th degree of the scale, we're getting 2/4 in this line. We're getting A to D in the lower octave, and then again A to D in the higher octave. And having those two perfect fourths occur in the line, to me, gives the line very much a modern feel. Here's another example of Chick using a major triad starting with the 5th on the bottom. Here over this D major 7th chord, he has the notes A, D, and F sharp, immediately followed by A, D, F sharp, an octave higher. Again, that perfect fourth starting the line on the lower octave, and then another perfect fourth starting the line on the higher octave. And just to really drive the point home, here again he's using that major triad formation starting with the 5th on the bottom, but in this case he's using an A major triad over an F sharp 7th chord. And as we know by now, that A major triad is a triad that we can pull from an F sharp half whole diminished scale. He has the notes E, A, the perfect fourth, followed by a C sharp, and then immediately an octave higher, another E to A, followed by a C sharp. So again, to me, this is another great idea for constructing longer lines. You can take triads or you can take 7th chords and repeat them up an octave. Now, another technique we can see in a lot of Chick's lines is the idea of using enclosure. And this, of course, is not just a Chick Corea thing, but this is something that's common in jazz. And the idea is that we can extend a line by first encircling a note from a half step higher and a half step lower before hitting it, as opposed to hitting the note directly. We have an example of this here in the very first line that Chick plays in the solo. So take a look here over the F sharp 7 chord. Take a look at the end of this line. Look at the notes G natural and F natural at the end of the line on the 4th beat. And these notes are creating an enclosure around the F sharp, which comes on the 1st beat of the next bar. Now, if we didn't have this G natural and F natural, perhaps the line would have ended right on the 4th beat on an F sharp, but instead we can elongate the line by first enclosing that F sharp, or encircling it, from a half step higher and a half step lower. And this technique works because our ear hears those notes as leading us towards the center of gravity, which is the note F sharp. Here's another example of this kind of enclosure, occurring here on the E minor 7th chord. On the 1st beat, we see the notes E flat and then C sharp. And these notes are enclosing that D, which comes on the 2nd beat, with the E flat being a half step higher than the D and the C sharp being a half step lower than the D. So thanks for checking out this video. If you liked the video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel so you can get more videos just like this. See you next time.